Here's a situation that's probably happened to you. You're scrolling through social media, and literally every third post is someone showing off their new tattoo. Your gym buddy just got their rib cage inked. Your sister's planning her sleeve. Even your accountant has a full back piece you discovered at the company pool party. Meanwhile, you're sitting there with completely unmarked skin. And somehow, in 2025, you're the one people find unusual. We've reached this weird cultural tipping point where having tattoos has become a norm, and not having them puts you in the minority. Recent data shows that almost 50% of millennials have at least one tattoo, which means if you don't, you're literally swimming against the demographic current. But here's what's interesting. We've spent decades dissecting why people get tattoos, the psychology, the meaning, the identity expression. Entire research papers dedicated to understanding tattoo culture. But almost nobody has stopped to ask the opposite question. What about the people who look at tattoos and say no thanks? And when you actually dig into the research on this group, their psychology is far more complex than anyone gives them credit for. Let's tackle the most obvious one first, but with a twist you probably haven't considered. Yes, it's about permanence, but not in the way you think. Consider this contradiction. The average person will sign a contract for a house that'll take 30 years to pay off without hesitating. They'll get married, which is theoretically a lifetime commitment. They'll have kids, which is literally the most permanent decision a human can make. You can't return children, but suggest a small tattoo on their ankle. Suddenly, permanence becomes this insurmountable psychological barrier. What's actually happening in their brain? Psychologists call it future self-continuity, and it's fascinating. Some people have a weak connection to their future selves. When they try to imagine themselves at 50, it doesn't feel like them. It feels like imagining a completely different person who happens to share their body in the future. Think about what this means for tattoos. If you can't emotionally connect with your future self, getting permanent ink feels less like decorating your own body and more like making aesthetic choices for a stranger. A stranger you've never met, whose preferences you can't possibly know, but whose body you're altering forever. And here's the fascinating part. They might actually have a point. Research consistently shows that our personalities undergo significant shifts across decades. The symbol that feels deeply meaningful at 23 might feel embarrassingly outdated at 43. That band you die for at 19, your 40-year-old self might not even listen to that genre anymore. People who avoid tattoos tend to score higher on what researchers call temporal discounting awareness. They're exceptionally good at something most people struggle with, vividly imagining future regret before it happens. They can mentally time travel to their future self, look at permanent ink, and pre-experience the disappointment. That's not indecisiveness. That's sophisticated psychological forecasting. But there's another pattern that's even more psychologically interesting. Some people without tattoos operate with what researchers describe as fluid identity orientation. And this is where it gets really deep. These individuals fundamentally view themselves as perpetually unfinished. They're not becoming someone, they're always becoming. They see identity not as something you arrive at, but as something you continuously explore. For them, getting a tattoo feels like prematurely declaring, "This is who I am," when they're not ready to make that statement. Maybe they'll never be ready. A tattoo is inherently declarative. It announces, "This matters enough to me that I'm making it permanent." But what if your entire philosophy is based on not making permanent declarations? What if staying adaptable, remaining open, refusing to lock in any fixed statement about your identity? What if that's actually central to who you are? There's a psychological concept called identity foreclosure. It happens when people commit to an identity without adequately exploring their options first. People who avoid tattoos sometimes fear they'll foreclose on future versions of themselves. They'll close doors before they even know those doors exist. Now, here's where this gets uncomfortable. Some psychologists suggest this can occasionally signal something deeper. not just openness to growth, but actual avoidance of self-knowledge. A fear of deciding who you are rather than staying in perpetual exploration mode. The difference between staying open to possibilities and avoiding commitment to any version of yourself can be razor thin. Let's talk about something most tattoo-free people won't openly admit, even to themselves. Social calculation plays a massive role. Despite how mainstream tattoos have become, there's still a risk assessment algorithm running in some people's minds. They're constantly calculating. How will this affect my career path? What will my more conservative family members think? What assumptions will people make about me in professional settings? People without tattoos tend to be hyper-aware of social perception. They care deeply about managing how others view them, and permanent body art feels like surrendering control over that management process. This relates to what psychologists call impression management, the strategic curation of how you present yourself to the world. These individuals view tattoos as an uncontrollable variable. Once it's there, it shapes every first impression you make, and you can't adjust it based on context. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to address. Is this strategic wisdom or anxiety-driven limitation? Some of these people are making genuinely thoughtful decisions about professional navigation and social relationships. They're being strategic about long-term career goals in industries where tattoos might still carry subtle stigma. But others might be limiting their authentic self-expression because they're overly focused on external validation. They're letting fear of judgment override their genuine desires. The psychology here isn't inherently positive or negative. It just reveals different approaches to navigating social structures. Here's a perspective that almost never gets discussed, and honestly, it's kind of profound. Some people view their unmarked skin as an active, intentional choice, not a passive non-decision. There's an entire philosophy around keeping your body in its natural state, not from fear or judgment, but from genuine aesthetic appreciation. It's minimalism applied to your physical form. These individuals see their unmarked body as a form of intentional simplicity, a conscious rejection of the idea that you need external symbols to express internal meaning. Psychologically, this connects to what's called intrinsic identity orientation, the belief that your identity exists independently of external markers or symbols. These people don't need a tattoo to remember what they love or remind them of who they are. They carry meaning internally, not externally. And there's something genuinely powerful about that philosophy, right? In a world that constantly demands you express yourself, make a statement, stand out from the crowd, choosing not to participate becomes its own form of quiet rebellion. But this only works when it's an authentic choice, not a rationalization for fear. The psychology is entirely different between someone who's actively choosing unmarked skin versus someone who's just avoiding marked skin. Here's something that'll challenge your assumptions about depth and meaning. Some of the most deeply connected, emotionally rich people you'll ever meet don't have a single tattoo. We've created this cultural narrative that equates tattoos with depth. That ink equals meaning, but meaning doesn't require a physical medium. Some people experience profound connections to ideas, moments, and people without needing to etch them permanently into their skin. They're not less attached to these things. They're just attached differently. There's fascinating research on how memory and meaning-making work differently for different people. Some individuals process significant experiences by fully immersing in the moment, not by creating permanent physical reminders. Their memories don't fade from lack of external markers. In some cases, the internal processing actually creates more vivid, more emotionally accessible memories. Think about it practically. You don't forget your father's face because his portrait isn't tattooed on your chest. The absence of external symbols doesn't equal the absence of internal significance. For some people, that's simply how they operate with everything meaningful in their lives. They're internal meaning makers, not external meaning markers. So here's the reality. The psychology of people who never get tattoos is every bit as complex, valid, and fascinating as those who do. It's not about being boring, scared, or conformist. It's about future-focused thinking, fluid identity philosophy, social awareness, and sometimes just a fundamentally different approach to meaning-making and self-expression. And maybe that's the most interesting insight here. We spend enormous energy analyzing why people do things, why they get tattoos, make permanent choices, commit to external declarations of identity. But sometimes the absence of an action reveals just as much psychological depth as the action itself. Whether you're covered in meaningful ink or have pristine unmarked skin, the most important question isn't what you choose. It's whether that choice comes from authentic self-knowledge or from fear. Whether you're making it consciously or reactively. Whether it genuinely reflects who you are or who you think you should be. Because both paths, tattooed or tattoo-free, are simply different answers to the same fundamental human question. Who am I? And how do I want to exist in this world? If this video gave you a new perspective on tattoos, or the lack thereof, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling me, do you have tattoos or not? And more importantly, why? What's the real psychology behind your choice? And if you want to support deeper psychological content like this, click the join button to become a channel member. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.